there was a survivor who testified at the trials of the main suspect and did not see justice. But I knew that she remarried. Her husband had died in the course of that attack that she endured in 1924. But I knew that after the trials were over in 1926 that she remarried and moved on. And I just, through digging a little bit, found somebody I suspected to be a descendant. And I reached out, and the response was actually joyful in the way that they said, yeah, I know that I've heard about this horrific thing that had happened in her young life, but that she went on to create this amazing second act, right? She remarried, she had a bunch of kids, a bunch of grandkids and great-grandkids, and she still loved to dance in her 70s. And they sent me a gift, a picture of her smiling, surrounded by this huge family. And I thought, having read over and over again what she endured, to know that she got to go on and do that was so powerful for me.
Welcome to the Persistence U podcast with Lisbeth. That's you as in university, but we're really much more of a community here. Lisbeth Meredith is an author, speaker, and online teacher. Each week, she'll be delivering amazing stories from survivors and strivers, all threaded together with a dose of persistence. We're so glad you're listening.
For sisters and brothers, I am so very excited that you get to meet Nancy Locklin, the fabulous author I mentioned on the last episode. And by the way, I heard that some of you were very, very moved about Dr. Sabanisi's podcast last week. And it was very inspiring. And I'm just so grateful to connect with people like you, my listeners, as well as the guests on this podcast. There are times where I think this takes so much work to create this podcast. It takes a lot of work, a lot of money, and I don't want to do it forever. It will be awkward one day to retire it when you have a podcast called Persistence U with Lisbeth. But beyond that, I just love the people and the connection. It means the world. So thank you to Dr. Sabanisi and Dr. Nancy Locklin is also phenomenal. So I think you'll enjoy this fun story of how she managed to mobilize a bunch of students to do important research and it culminating into a book. Research that impacted generations of individuals whose lives were rocked by crime in the 1920s in Tennessee. So it wasn't just a fun project. It had real people who had real questions and needs to have those answered. Good for her. I'm just excited. Also, thank you to Don King, the confidence curator who has podcast The Alignment Show. I was so lucky to be on his show. In October, it released. We recorded much earlier, but a new episode I get to be on, promoting Tilka Faces the Odds One Man at a Time. The audiobook version of this novel is being released in February, and it was a lot of work, really challenging and delightful. So I'm glad that is finished and so fortunate to be able to record my own voice this time in a studio with someone at Wavelength Studio who knows so much more than I do about editing and all the things. So anyway, thank you so much and stay till the end. Let me know how you like it. I'm at lameredith.com. Enjoy Dr. Locklin. And please, if you can share with a friend, that surely helps me know that this is striking a nerve with you in a good way. I mean, striking a chord rather, not a nerve, and that it means something to you. Huge shout out to Maryville Don King, as well as my friend Jan, who also lives in Maryville, Tennessee. And now I feel after that most recent connection, I have to go to Maryville, Tennessee again. That's also where Dr. Locklin is. So enjoy. Thanks again. She is a professor at a university in Maryville. Tennessee. I first connected with her after watching a lecture she delivered at a museum in Cleveland, Tennessee. That lecture was about the Night Marauder, a serial killer that was present in East Tennessee back in the 1920s. And if you think about it, that's back in the day where people didn't have electricity necessarily. There was no air conditioning in humid and hot Tennessee. You had to leave your windows and doors open to get the place aerated that you lived. And there was no internet to be able to share about cases like police and law enforcement agencies do so easily today. So when you ask yourself, like, why was it so many of these bad things were happening and it kind of went unsolved or unconnected? Putting it in perspective, this is why. And so I listened to her lecture with just so much interest. I thought she was absolutely brilliant. Her last project took her into the realm of criminal justice, murder, justice, and harmony in the 18th century French village. And that work was published in 2019. But this is the Night Marauder project. And I just cannot tell you how interesting it was to me. Number one, that she would take this on and that her students would have enough enthusiasm that they would rally and help put this together. Soon it will be a book. And I'm just so fascinated as to why it is that she is interested in this particular project. And I noticed that she was very survivor centric. So I'm excited to hear how and why that came about. Dr. Nancy Locklin, and I did give your full other name before, but this is the name you'll be writing in. Dr. Nancy Locklin, Locklin. Welcome to Persistence U, Elizabeth. I really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you for speaking with me. I'm excited to be here.
I loved your presentation at the museum in Cleveland, Tennessee. I was just so amazed, but I was also wondering, how do you get students this day and age in college to get as engaged as you have to work with you? So can you tell us just a few sentences about actual crimes that kind of caught your attention, or maybe the history of your work, which I covered a little bit, but the actual crimes of the Night Marauder and how you did start to put it together brick by brick with your students and how you engaged their interest?
Well, in many ways, I'd let the students take the lead on this. I'm a first-generation college student myself, and I happened to get a full ride to a little liberal arts college up in upstate New York. And when I got a chance to teach at a similar institution, I jumped at the opportunity. And I've been here since 2000, so 25 years going on.
That's a long time.
Yes, and it's still my dream job. And I think I've just been so lucky in so many ways. When my second book came out, so I've had 2 books published already, but I'm an 18th century French historian. That's my discipline.
Interesting.
And my first book is based on my dissertation, and that was about women merchants, women workers in Western France in the 18th century. And while researching that, I happened to come across a whole trial dossier, a woman who was on trial in 1718 for murdering another woman. And everything was there. It was like, the entire packet was everything I needed in terms of primary sources. But in order to put that story into context, I had to learn a lot about the history of violence, the history of murder. I mean, I was astonished to find out that there was a field on the history of murder. Like, that's a free.
Right. So wow, it is kind of mind-boggling, really.
It is. So we're a small department. I get very close to my students. And as I was learning this stuff, I was sharing it with them. And at one point I said something along the lines of, if I developed a class on the history of murder, do you think you'd be interested? And a lot of students said, yeah, we would. I know that there is some faculty out there who, for all the right reasons, resist the idea that they should develop new classes all the time. But I'm just a curious person. I get excited about something I want to develop. I've developed so many new classes. And this one just attracted a following. We have, in addition to the history major, we have a criminal justice major and psychology and journalism. Everybody was interested. And so I developed the class because there was student interest. And then when I was looking for material to use, especially local material, I came across descriptions of someone in the 1920s it was basically a home invasion, an attempted assault, and then that would often include a murder. So this was somebody who was intent on assaulting people, and there's no evidence of robbery or anything. But this person also never hesitated to commit the murder. And so as I learned more about it, I even, posted things on social media like, I think I found a local cold case to put in my class. And the few students I was connected with through social media immediately jumped on board and said, yes, please, we'll help you solve it. We want to be part of this.
Wow. Okay. I like that. I mean, if you watch Netflix or another streaming service today, you can see a few different projects where people get involved as true crime junkies, but it's way different. It's far different in the university level to have students engage with their professor on something so historical as this.
Mm-hmm.
I love that they just showed that initial interest. So then did you just write up the description of a class and go through the channels?
Yeah, and honestly, we at the college, we're small enough that this is not a problem. I just basically submitted a proposal and said, this is the topic I want to teach. It took me one semester to get it approved. And the first year, we were still remote. I had people, if they did come in person, it was in masks, 6 to 8 feet away from me, maybe only 5 or 6 people in the room with me at the time, and the rest online. I was doing these hyperflex classes, but a lot of the source material we needed was online. And so it was especially, I think, interesting in the context of a remote classroom because so many people became disconnected at that time. And so I had this group of people who were excited to show up, excited to log in and share what they discovered with one another, and then just send me their research projects over email. And we built a project. And, I am in the process of publishing the book, but it's really thanks to them. And the other side of it, too, was that because my training was in 18th century French history, I was not prepared to do local history in East Tennessee, but this is my home now and has been for a long time. And so I had a local reference librarian and a local genealogist and a couple of different archivists who were my support. And they've met with my students. They've gotten me public presentations. So everything I do is in thanks to the community around me.
Oh, I think that's so fantastic. It's such a collaborative effort. I noticed when you were giving your presentation at the museum that you were very survivor-centric. You were very sensitive as to how you talk about this, this historical piece, that you're connecting a lot of dots, but they were real people. Even if they're not alive today, they were real people with real survivors. What drove that sensitivity, and did you find a way to teach it in your class as well?
I did. And so what drove it, I'd like to say that from the beginning, even when I was writing about my 18th century murder trial, I felt this, my professors were really good at teaching us to be responsible. We're writing about people. No matter what we write about, we're writing about people. And so I even reached out to someone I found through a genealogy website in France and said, oh, by the way, my book is coming out and you are a descendant of this person. It's 200 years ago or more. And so in that case, I got a response that was something like, hey, cool. But today, for this project, and I think also for some of the local news organizations being remote in everything, they were looking for stories. The local newspaper in Maryville, Tennessee, the Daily Times, featured me. I thought it was going to be a little blurb, like a little human interest story. My class and my project was front page on Easter Sunday above the fold. And so we got a lot of exposure right then and there locally. And then each of the three news stations, television news stations, in turn contacted me to do a remote interview.
That is wonderful. I mean, here that happens. Normally that takes a PR firm. You've spent like $15,000 to get a PR person to reach out, but this just happened organically.
It did. And that's what inspired people to contact me. So I started getting emails or voicemails at my office number, people who found me through the college website, to say, oh, that person, I know that my great great aunt was one of the victims. I know that, my grandmother told me about this. I even had somebody tell me that his dad was a paper boy in the neighborhood of the main suspect, and who remembered, coming down the street to deliver the news and seeing the guy on his front porch and just flinging that newspaper from a block away and running in the other direction. And so people just came to find me. And
Right.
so many of their stories were poignant. And it really got me thinking, it's one thing to reach out to someone who's distantly descended from somebody who had a legal issue 200 years ago. And it's another thing to say, my mom remembered that. My mom told me about that. It was something we talked about when we were little. And
Because
so,
that trauma really does pass from generation to generation, even if no one names it.
yes.
People are impacted by what happened in their parents' or families' lives, even if it's kept a secret to them. So I bet that was very poignant for people to be able to say, hey, I remember hearing stories, or I remember some sadness or whatever.
And I did have some great stories too. One of the few people I reached out to, I've mentioned, and you saw in that talk, there was a survivor who testified at the trials of the main suspect and did not see justice. But I knew that she remarried. Her husband had died in the course of that attack that she endured in 1924. But I knew that after the trials were over in 1926, that she remarried and moved on. And I just, through digging a little bit, found somebody I suspected to be a descendant. And I reached out, and the response was actually joyful in the way that they said, yeah, I know that I heard about this horrific thing that had happened in her young life, but that she went on to create this amazing second act, right? She remarried, she had a bunch of kids, a bunch of grandkids and great grandkids, and she still loved to dance in her 70s. And they sent me a gift, a picture of her smiling, surrounded by this huge family. And I thought, having read over and over again what she endured, to know that she got to go on and do that, that was so powerful for me. And so
That
I
is
have
lovely.
so I have this enduring sense of responsibility. I want to tell their stories. It's not easy, I think, but people do move beyond these things and can rebuild something.
Right. I like that, especially, but it's so validating to have someone reach out and say, can you share, or can I share with you what I've done regarding your family? And then they're able to share a little bit of their story. And that resilience that this woman had must have really impacted the family in a positive way, just to know that she'd been through so much and yet didn't see justice, but still managed to have a delightful and fulfilling life in the next chapter.
Yes, absolutely.
That's exciting. And how close are you now to getting this book? And please tell us the tentative title, and I know it'll have a subtitle, but how close are you to having it published?
Well, I have a contract with a University of Tennessee at Knoxville Press. They do a lot of great work with Tennessee history. And I have a manuscript, but I'm rearranging it based on peer reports. So my deadline is May 2025. And they think that once we establish all the permissions and the layout and all of that great editing stuff that they do there, yeah, we should see it released in the middle of 2026.
Oh, love it. That is so exciting. And it's smart that you're already getting out and talking about it, and it drums up interest. so that by the time it is published, it won't be one of those 1 in a million stories. There will be people who have been waiting to have this book in their hands. And Knoxville is like the true crime capital, one of the true crime capitals in the United States. So, I mean, other things could come from that as well. There probably could be documentary interest and things like that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. And I must say that in thanks to I've told people attached to my project from the very beginning, my acknowledgments pages are going to be as long as any of the other chapters, because every student who contributed background research, did all that work. They're all going to be acknowledged. The background research they did will appear in my citations, and those librarians and archivists, oh my God, the heroes of this story. So I think that I've also built relationships that will be recognized and continue forward. And I'm very proud of that.
That is beautiful. And congratulations. That really is. That's very, very lovely. And I think your students will be so excited to be a part of something this big, to launch with their education and already have been a part of something like this. Is pretty life-changing.
I think so. I even had a psychology intern for a while.
Wow. Okay. That's excellent. Have there been emotional moments when you were doing this?
I think mostly in conjunction when in revisiting some of the more powerful stories. So like I told you, the survivor who went on to rebuild a life. This is also connected to ongoing efforts in Knoxville. A Black man who was a suspect in one of the murders, Maurice Mays, was actually executed for that crime, even though, I mean, all the evidence points to it being that crime having been the first in a long series that continued after Mr. Mays had died. And so that's another place where I feel responsibility, like maybe we can bring more attention to that. But hearing about everybody connected to that part of the story has also been very emotional for me. And when I presented it in Knoxville, in a couple of places, I presented it with the Beck Cultural Exchange Center, which is our Black Cultural History Museum in Knoxville, and archive and an educational center. And also with the Knoxville History Project. I had people in attendance there too who knew a lot about that story and were excited to see somebody bring new attention to it.
Talk about changing lives and lifting sort of a cloud over the family. That could be a really wonderful thing.
Yes.
So fantastic. I just can't think of anything more enjoyable than that. Were there any reluctant students, or were they from the beginning like, they just want to know how you engage people? What is the secret sauce? Were you paying them? That's awesome.
No, I didn't encounter any reluctance when it came to doing the work or getting, being involved, being part of the class. There were a couple of the local news stations who wanted to interview students in addition to me. Then they were camera shy. And so I got a little bit of that. But, that's to be expected. And,
absolutely.
But mostly, I think I'm teaching the class again this semester. I'm trying to start a new project, and it's not as exciting to some of my current students think, well, why couldn't I have been on board when you were doing the Night Marauder now?
Right. They'll have class ending.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, that's exciting. Well, can you let listeners know where it is they can find more about this project and connect with you and the release of your book, even though it'll be a little while from now?
Well, so my students and I kept a blog throughout the major part of the project. So the blog, we don't post to it anymore now that we've finished telling the story, but that's the nightmarauderproject.com.
Perfect.
I think if you just put the Night Marauder in Google or whatever, it'll take you there. They can also find me at the website for Maryville College. It's just maryvillecollege.edu, and in East Tennessee. And yeah, so I'm easy to find. I think when the book comes out, there'll be some publicity for that too, but I'm excited about it.
I'm excited too. I can't wait to read it. And thank you so much. And it will be under your name, the writing name of Dr. Locklin.
Yes.
So just as it sounds. So fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing this. I'm really excited and impressed. And I think even though that was a really, very deep project for your students to dive into, it's doing so much good, not only for their future career paths, but also for families involved.
Mhm. Well, thank you. Thank you for helping to bring light to it.
Oh my, I'm excited. I really am. Thanks for being here.
All right. You're welcome. Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's show. Thank you so much for listening. Now, to find out more, head on over to lameredith.com and be sure to hop on the mailing list too. If you've enjoyed this show, please leave a rating and review or share with a friend. And if you really, really liked it, go ahead and subscribe so that you never miss another episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Persistence U with Lisbeth.